in the house this afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This is Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. This is a podcast where we invite you to text questions that you might have about God and spirituality and the greater things of the universe and life, about the Bible, about Christianity, about how it compares to other religions, about the personal level of just spirituality, the questions that we all have about ethics and right and wrong and how to follow God in this crazy, messed up world. If you got questions, text them in, 815-314-0363. Give you that one more time, 815-314-0363. We get them here in real time. We do the best job we can, answer them on the spot. We have got quite a host of questions here. Guys, the amount of questions that you have been texting in is pretty incredible. Generally more than we can get to every week, but your questions are important. And we've got an inbox here in the studio with Andrew Metcalf, who is the tender of the inbox. Here is Steve Wells, who may have killed his cat this morning, and we got Ken Jones producing. So
the job might not be done even.
I don't even know or not.
You know, if you found Steve's cat anywhere, let him know, all right?
Yeah.
Somewhere between here and Woodstock.
Yeah, between McHenry, Illinois and Woodstock, Illinois.
We might find it at the car wash later. Yes. Anyway, let's not let that get out. I don't know if it's true, so let's not start any rumors.
Let's not start any rumors yet. All right.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah.
Edit out of the live show, right?
Yeah.
And since we got her as a kitten, cats have 9 lives, so this would be the one.
Well, that's
so
the one.
She's got 8 more.
Yeah.
Plenty of chances.
We're good. We're good. I'm surprised you guys haven't said anything about my coffee cup today.
You know, I'm digging the flowers. You know,
well, they're Hawaii. It's Hawaii.
Noticed.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So you have a silver one without the flowers.
I did, and then that sat in the back of the car for a little too long.
That's
haven't got it to the dishwasher yet.
Right.
Or if it's even redeemable.
It's a nice
or it's even worse when they go like straight to Salvation Army and skip the dishwasher.
Well,
it's like, what are you guys doing?
It's like, remember when you were younger and you had the kids and the sippy cups?
Yeah.
And they, like, man, what is that smell?
And they would get a tinge about it.
Oh, yeah, just horrible.
It was always like milk.
It's death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could soak those things in vinegar. It didn't matter. You know, it just, yeah.
So our keyboard player at church, she bought me this mug, and it has my name on it, you know, and it's like guitar player. It looks like an acoustic guitar, and it's like, dude, the nutritional facts, like talent 100%, you know, like here. Very nice of her to give me.
Yeah.
However, as she is, so Sunday.
Wait, I want to know her full rating system here on you. You know, I mean, just we got to circle back on.
Well,
this
I don't know what it is
criteria.
exactly.
Right.
I'll bring it next week.
Okay.
But point being is that Sunday I'm coming into church. You know, I've got my full cup of coffee that, you know, in this mug that she gave me, and I go to take a drink, and the thing just all down the front of my shirt. And so I told her when I got there, I said, Chris, you know what? I'm a little upset with you. Like, you gave me this cup, you know, and I appreciated it. But now I said, do you realize what it's doing? She's like, I know mine did the same thing. I'm like, why are you just telling me this now? Jeez. And she's like, I know. And I had black on and it spilled all the time. Okay. Anyway, thanks for the cup. Appreciate it.
That's why you wear black.
Yeah, exactly right.
Stains.
So that's why I have this Hawaiian cup that we actually literally got in Hawaii. So it's Barbie's though. So I had to steal it from her. So now I'm on the hunt for a new coffee mug if my other one isn't redeemable.
You've probably got about 6 of them floating around church.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure I do.
You ever check that lost and found? I think it was like 28.
I know, but see, that's the thing. It's like, well, you know what condition those are going to be in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to be good. Just throw them away.
God gave you a dishwasher.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, we got any questions?
We do have some questions.
Good.
This first one here is rather lengthy. I think we got it sometime during the last show. But it starts out, hi, Pastor Dave and Steve. So this is only
not you,
for
Andrew.
You
Not
Andrew,
you.
you have no say, no comments.
Because this is Andrew writing it.
Yeah.
Andrew's throwing us under the bus.
That's how
saying that it's from someone else.
I avoid answering questions.
Wrote this.
This one says Andrew don't answer, so
I
don't know.
Wow. Very specific.
Okay, kind of a saga here. This is probably kind of a weird question. I'm a huge Beatles fan, and especially a huge George Harrison fan. The song My Sweet Lord came out when I was about 11 years old, and I thought it was about Jesus. I happily sang along with the 45 single that I purchased with my $1 a week allowance. Recently, I was creating a playlist on my phone and added that song and was singing along with it and came to the Hare Krishna and all the other words that were in a language that I don't know. I was singing along and asked myself, am I worshiping another god mindlessly by singing this song? I thought about Googling what the words meant, but I was scared to death. Am I being overly afraid because I don't want to offend God? I just like the song.
You know what? I love this question.
Mm-hmm.
This is the stuff that, I mean, it's kind of fun to read from afar and like laugh through, but this is the stuff that's real. You know, the little things that just kind of get
the everydays.
They get in your head.
It's the everydays, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for asking this. And, you know, I want to push it one further. I mean, it's just really cool to see someone that wants that much loyalty and devotion to Christ that they don't want to do anything. It's like when someone's so committed to their spouse, they don't want to risk like any kind of hint of, you know, adultery or attraction or getting their heart torn in another direction. I almost see that kind of being the same here. So that's really kind of cool. You know, I don't know the song actually that well. I mean, obviously I know the Beatles and George Harrison and a lot of his, you know, Eastern religious moorings and the effect that had on the Beatles. And you know the song, Steve?
Probably if I heard it, I don't know. Like, I'm not a huge Beatles fan, so
yeah. So I mean, I can't really kind of speak to the lyrics here or what's being said. Andrew, I think maybe you're pulling it up right now. But you know, I would just say this. You know, I kind of take seriously, and I think we should take seriously, even if it's just lip service to things that we don't agree with, believe in, or certainly that has a split, you know, allegiance, especially when it comes to God. So if your conscience is giving you a hard time on this one, you know, obviously you like the song. I'm not going to say don't like the song. You know, it doesn't work that way. But, you know, maybe you're not singing that part. Maybe you're not doing it. Or maybe you're baptizing the lyrics and changing them and singing it your way to Christ. I mean, I've seen people do that kind of thing too. It's a tough one to answer in a blanket statement because, you know, as Paul will say in Romans chapter 14, what one person's faith allows them to do, another does not. Now, at no point can any of us ever give our allegiance, if we're followers of Christ, to another God, right? And so we got to be careful of our language there. But if your conscience is giving you a hard time on this, you know, don't sit here and worry about the past. If you're afraid you sinned in the past or did something wrong, well, ask God for forgiveness on that and move forward. But, you know, maybe you're not singing this one, you know?
It looks like it's mostly I'll show you this, in the echoes. It's saying...
Yeah, we got Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devu. You know, Vishnu, of course, one of the triad Hindu gods, you know, Brahma as well, you know, and on and on. So, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, whether it's Sanskrit here, and again, I'm not a big enough expert on this to be able to comment which language specifically. I'd imagine it's probably Sanskrit.
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, it definitely has Hindu moorings in it. And, you know, if you don't know what you're saying, there's always kind of a wisdom. It's kind of guarding your tongue just a little bit.
Well, yeah, so, and I think, too, like, just like you said, you know, the first time you're listening to this stuff, and as, you know, we all have those songs that we listen to as, you know, through our whatever years that we're like, I don't really care for the lyrics, but I'm not really paying attention to the lyrics. I just like the song, you know, like that's what we say.
Yeah.
But then as you do get older and maybe a little wiser and things become a little bit more clear to you as far as maybe, oh, well, this is now challenging some things that I do believe in. And so therefore it's kind of like, well, fine, you know, it served its purpose in the day. You're always going to enjoy the melody and sing along because it was part of your childhood or whatever. So, but I think if your intent is, well, yes, I'm going to believe in this, well, then I think that's a different story. So,
you know, something I think from the early church too, and this is New Testament kind of stuff, but it's really was a big deal in those early centuries of the church and even the New Testament era about who you claimed as Lord. You know, the mantra that Christians used was Jesus is Lord, and that had a lot of implication for who was not. And this was in direct response to the, shall I say, Roman imperial pledge of allegiance in which you had to claim Caesar is Lord. And with that, of course, came all kinds of not just political baggage, but metaphysical and spiritual baggage as well. And they wouldn't say it. I mean, they would actually go to death before saying it. And, you know, there was a debate going, like, if I don't mean it, who cares what I say? You know, just say it, get on with it, spare my neck, spare my family's neck. But the ones that were held up in the New Testament in the early church were the ones who had such allegiance to Christ that what they said had integrity, and they didn't divorce it as easy as I think we can kind of do today. And so that kind of challenges me and convicts me. So, it says this is the Keith Richards of FOF who's asking the question. So want to know who that is,
Yeah.
But
if your name is actually Keith Richards.
yeah. So Keith, hopefully that helps.
I think I know who it is, but I can't say.
All right.
So.
All right.
We've got one here that I think could be interesting, possibly long answers for it, but it's obviously
Steve likes long
directed
answers,
at Dave, but I think all of us can answer. Why did you choose to be a pastor or choose to be a worship leader, or tech person, or banker / deacon /
whatever it is, I am.
podcast host / whatever else you are?
One of those card things that just unfold.
Yeah, right.
Let's see. I'm right here.
Short questions always have the long answers, don't they?
Yeah.
I'll give my own story on this since it's kind of directed here. Why did you choose to become a pastor? But I never wanted to do this. In my childhood, I was always one of those personalities that kind of lived in the future more than the present, and always had kind of steps laid out and knew pretty clearly what I wanted. And my family, especially my father's side, was all federal law enforcement, and he was an ex-military, and that was the route I was planning to go. I mean, I idolized that kind of stuff. I was going to do ROTC, I was going to do a military stint, and then pick those 3 federal letters of choice, or whichever one I can get into. And it was beyond just kind of what I would call that childhood fantasy that I think everyone has. If I'm going to be a fireman, I'm going to be a cop, that type of thing. I mean, it was deeper. It was in the blood, more or less. And I'll spare the whole story, but God just got a hold of me one day in a very direct way, threw me up against a wall. And I was very convicted that I was supposed to be a pastor. I'd even describe it as an inaudible voice, or maybe a thought so strong that it felt like it came from outside of me rather than inside of me. However you want to put it, I don't care. But it was so absolutely flooring and convicting and pinning, and I couldn't escape it. And I cried out. I mean, I screamed, I begged, I pleaded, I wrestled, I fought. I tried everything to get rid of that and to get God to relent, because I was convinced it was God telling me to do it. And I couldn't shake it. And you kind of come to a place in your life where you realize, if God picks a fight with you, you can fight him back your whole life and be miserable, or you just finally say uncle and get on with it and trust yourself to him. And that's kind of what I did. I said, Lord, I don't want to be a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor. So be it. This is what you want me to do. Okay. And as soon as doing that, I was completely content and at peace with the decision. And it wasn't like I started applying to seminary the next day. But that was kind of, God had to throw me up against a wall. It was the only way I was getting into this.
And was this when you were in college then?
Actually high school.
High school.
And then there was a progression from there, of other things that built on and reinforced it and things like that. But yeah, that's my story. That's how I found my way there.
Who's next?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, great. Well, so I'm the technical director at Fellowship of Faith, so kind of all things AV, website, electronic, video, that type of stuff. And I've always had an interest in AV and media. And for me, it really started I think I was in 6th grade, and our school had chapel once a week. Mm-hmm. And one of the teachers asked, hey, would you want to run sound or the slides for chapel? I was like, do I get to get out of class for it? Then yes, absolutely.
Praise God.
Yeah. I guess I'll do it. And then since then, I've just kind of been involved with AV things, either in the church or outside of the church, or kind of alongside the church. So before I moved here, I was in Nebraska working at an AV company. We worked with a church and did a lot of church events, but I wasn't employed by the church. So I've always kind of been alongside the church in whatever I've done for work or volunteering at the church or those types of things. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily a planned direction, but it just kind of happened through what I did throughout college. I was working and doing a lot of AV stuff while studying business. Mm-hmm. And, since graduating, have mostly stayed in the vein of AV stuff versus business stuff.
I hear that a lot. Isn't it crazy how it's often like the hobby or the side hustle or whatever that ends up becoming the career, as opposed to what you think you're going to be getting into or majoring in or, whatever. I hear that story so often. You were a godsend to Fellowship of Faith because I think you came on September, October of 2019.
2019, yeah.
I want to say, and I mean, Steve, I remember you came first and you're like, okay, we need a technical director around here. And this guy named Andrew, and I think he might be willing to come. And then, you came part-time, and then, COVID hit in March, and,
we got a little busier
for full-time, exploded. And I mean, it was just, thank you, Lord, I've been saying it ever since, Andrew.
Thanks.
All right, Steve, you're up.
You said that it's often your side job or your hustle. And I completely agree with that, but it's not surprising to me because I think those are the gifts and the desires that God has created you. You're unique, right? So he created you to have certain, to be a certain way as far as what you find interesting, your talents and your gifts and that type of stuff. Yeah. So I think for me, and probably looking at both of you, very fortunate because it's we actually get to do something that he created us, the desires of our hearts almost, to actually do. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, growing up, it was always music, as many of you know, it's I sat behind my first drum set at 4 and never looked back. I was this is what I'm in love with. I love these things. I like the aggression. I like the pounding of, I like the sounds. I like, just how it coincides with everything else and it drives it, because without a good drummer, a good drummer can either drums can make or break a band. It's either, if you don't have a good drummer, you're going to sense that there's rhythms that are weird and whatnot. So to me, just the music side of it, and then how God kind of orchestrated just not even in the church realm, but the secular realm of me going through that progression of being in bands and leading bands and honing those skills. And then all of a sudden, through a tax person and through a band, was well, you guys should go check this church out. And then all of a sudden here, it's this. So
this strange kind of
orchestrated, but yet
through a tax person. I mean, it's just you kind of gave that as a throwaway line, but it is. It's always these weird opportunities that
So I'm very thankful to him for leading me in this direction.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Let me ask you this though, because as a pastor, do you believe, because it especially within the LCMS, it's a called position, called with a capital C, right? Mm-hmm. In the Lutheran Church.
Right.
Do you think that there are pastors in the Lutheran Church or wherever that probably weren't called?
Oh yeah. Yeah, not in the way that people think about the word anyway.
Yeah.
Which I think forces us to redefine the word. I know so many guys personally that I went to seminary with, but other people in the area that I've just kind of done life with ever since, who are some of the most amazing pastors, priests, ministers. I don't care what title you give it right now, that you never met, that kind of went, well, I don't know. I thought I'd give it a whirl and see what happens.
Yeah.
and it kind of is a little off-putting, but that's sometimes how God gets people in. I mean, there's that, I love this old line that there's one way to God and that's Christ, but there's 1,000 ways to Christ. And I kind of think the same holds true to the ministry a little bit. There's kind of one call God has out there, to this position, what it might be, but 1,000 ways to get people there. So I do think it kind of forces us to redefine what that terminology means, especially when you get really sectarian in a specific denomination, because it starts getting loaded with all kinds of conceptual baggage.
Yeah.
But at some level, I mean, I think, if you just boil it down and get rid of all the weirdness and go, okay, we kind of see in the Bible, there's this position, call it whatever you want, of someone who's leading a church, call it an elder, call it a pastor, there's 10 different titles floating around out there, right? Mm-hmm. And if it's just basically a position where it's kind of someone who's been recognized as being given both the responsibility and the authority for guiding this church, well, 1,000 ways you can get there.
Yeah, and I guess on the opposite side of that too, it's I've seen many that have taken the call that maybe they were not, maybe they missed the message. Like, I don't know if this is for you. I don't know that this is your strength, or maybe you should go back to that side hustle.
Well, then you have people who don't listen to that call and put it off and fight it their whole lives.
Yeah.
I think that was something my brother was doing. Someone had told him he was going to be a pastor, and he's like, I don't want to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a youth leader, and did that for 5 years, and then ended up at the seminary because he was finally like, okay,
He got
enough.
sucked
Like,
into the
I've had
black
enough people
hole.
tell me this. I've had
Yeah.
enough things like overlap with that just lined it up. So
Yeah.
But, and I think it redefines the position too, because you start to realize that it's more, the classic term they give this is office. I always found that a weird term growing up, because when I hear an office, I think of like a little cubicle in the corner. And that's not what it really means. I think it's better to just say position. This is a position God wants in any given congregation or church, and someone's got to fill it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people who are filling positions that might not be the most talented at that position, but sometimes perspiration beats inspiration. You know what I mean? And sometimes tenacity is a more important gift than, ability.
Yeah.
As we know from the sports world too.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people who have the willingness to take on the yoke, if I can use that traditional terminology, even if they're not the most gifted at it. I mean, we see this in everything. We see this with politicians. We see this with, all kinds of positions. But yeah, you're choosing to step into the role, even if you're not the best on the block.
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, we just watched a clip. I think this was at youth on Sunday night from The Chosen of when Jesus calls Matthew.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting how they show it, because he's at his tax collector booth doing his thing and talking with a Roman guard there, like, man, you're the best at this, and you're so fortunate you ended up here. And then Jesus walks by, and it's just like, hey, come follow me. And there's this like little moment of hesitation, but then it's just all in. And the Roman guard that was there with Matthew is like, what are you doing? Like, you're throwing away everything.
Yeah.
You're throwing away
Career, your
everything
future.
that you have to go do this. And Matthew's carrying whatever the little counter device is. I don't know, some
Abacus.
that abacus. There you go. And
Good math guy.
do you still have one?
Yeah.
Do you still use one?
Yeah, at his bank.
Yeah, right. In case the power goes out.
Right,
Yeah.
But Matthew's got that, and Jesus is like, oh, keep that with you. You might need that. So it's like, okay, do we know that Matthew was in charge of the money of the disciples and all that stuff? No, but it would make sense that, well, this is what he's been doing with his job. So how can God use that as something for the kingdom? I was like, granted, that's probably taking a little bit of freedom in scripture, but it's cool to see it from that perspective.
And you definitely see that trajectory with a lot of people. I mean, even just our conversation here today.
Yeah.
There's an old movie back in the 80s called The Mission, which
I think I've seen that.
And it's not a Christian movie. It's not like Christian movies get kind of cheesy. I mean, this was like a theatrical release. And it was basically, it was, the colonial era. So I don't know what we're talking here. Maybe it was 16th century, 17th century. I don't really care. But the point was, there was this guy who was a soldier, a mercenary, even for that matter, who came to Christ and found himself connected with the mission and using his mercenary skills. And I know this is sounding like a plot of like Rambo 6 right now or something, but it was done in a very serious tone. How he was trying to help them learn how to guard this mission against, the attack from other conquistadors that were coming in and things like that.
That's not the one that I was thinking of. This one is some missionary goes into the jungle.
Oh, you're thinking of Tip of the Spear. That was like in the 90s.
That was good. That's a good one.
That was 90s
Yeah.
or something
I was
like
like,
that.
there's something. I remember watching that. Yeah.
You ever seen the one about the potato farmer? He's over in South
Oh.
Africa.
The potato farmer
Yeah.
in South Africa.
That was really good.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Faith Like Potatoes. That's what it's called.
Faith like Faith.
Yes, that's the movie. And I'm telling you, it's really good. And I say that because I just watched one on Break Every Chain is what it was called. I'm going to tell you right now, it's on Amazon Prime, and it got very good reviews. But I swear that like they paid for the reviews. from, or half of the people that were in the movie or in the cast or production are the ones that are rating this.
Yeah, right.
Because it's not good. So save your hour and a half and just bypass it. Go watch Faith Like Potatoes.
Faith Like Potatoes.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Huh? All
End
right,
of the
all
spear.
right.
By the way, it's not tip of the spear.
You sure?
Yes.
End of the spear?
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Because I showed both of those on our trips down to Branson.
Seen it many a times.
Been there, done that. Okay, you guys watch this movie. I'll be in the back. Just had some donuts. I'm going to take a nap.
Enjoy that.
See you in Clinton, Missouri at the Golden Corral.
Now, did you plan your trip so that you could go to a Golden Corral? Like that would be your stop?
So you've got to think
'Cause I'm
about this.
imagining.
You've got 60 senior citizens, and they all have an opinion. Well, the nice thing about the Golden Corral is you can have an opinion. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but it doesn't matter. You can have your choice of whatever you think is good or bad. So we're not going in and ordering, and everything. That was such a well-oiled machine by the 10th year. So it was great.
You know, I
You knew all
hear
the
this and it's
stops.
legendary. I'm still waiting for the Fellowship of Faith bus
I
tour to
know, but
Branson.
it's
you
so
know?
hard because it's a lot longer of
It
a
is,
trip,
it
and
is,
so
yeah.
it's going to add a lot of costs, and especially with inflation right now. Fuel's not cheap, food's not cheap, entertainment's
We
not
need
cheap.
the Great Lakes equivalent of Branson.
We do.
You know, and
We
I mean,
do.
Wisconsin Dells kind of flirts with that, but it's not really the same.
They need the shows and
Yeah.
that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we can take them to a tour of McHenry County and the Vixen is part of our show now.
There you go. Yeah, right.
Hey, Tosh is with us, and she says, "Thank you that you surrendered, Dave, to your calling."
How do
Andrew,
you know she's talking to me? She might be talking to Andrew.
no, that was when
I
you
think
were
that was
talking,
you.
because then she says, "Thank you, Andrew," and then "Thank you, Steve." So
Oh, there we go.
I'm
All
going
right.
to assume
All right.
that since you were talking during that time, it's you.
You can probably, I don't know. That comment's probably not great.
Hi, guys.
Let's do this one. What advice do you have for parents trying to raise good Christian children in this current world where we have social media, topics being pushed through TV, and so many outside forces working against us? What we try to teach children these days is constantly being challenged.
Yeah, and thanks for asking. I mean, way to go and taking that call seriously. It's been the same in every generation. Different mediums, different challenges, but people have always been pressured to a way other than the way of Christ, because the way of Christ is so fundamentally different from any other cultural way, no matter how Christian a nation or culture claims to be, in whatever generation it might be. So I'd say this: you got to live it, walk the walk. You could tell your kids a lot about the way of Christ and what's right and wrong. But what do you actually delight in? What do you actually spend your time in? What are you actually immersing yourself in? What kind of mediums are you surrounding yourself with? Kids learn by watching their parents more than by listening to their parents. I'm fully convinced of that. I see examples. I'll give you just a couple things that spark to mind. I mean, I've met so many, shall I say, good Christian parents, right? And they tell their kids about the danger of drug abuse and alcohol abuse and things like that. But then they recount their own stories of when they were a teenager, and they always do it with a gleam in their eye. And maybe they've walked away from that life since, but they look back on it and you see it come out a little bit. They think back of it as their glory days, or kind of with a sense of pride surrounding it. That kind of stuff communicates.
Mhm.
Are you actually broken over it? Or did you just walk away from it for other practical purposes, but your heart's still attached to it in certain ways? I think all of us as parents have our pitfalls that way, and inadvertently end up communicating ideas of what's fun, what's important, what's good, what experiences should you have. I think social media is far less dangerous than parents are. So. None of that's to say being naive to what's out there and letting things come indiscriminately into your house. But I just think it's a corrective. And sometimes we got to know who the worst, quote, enemy actually is.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things they said in here, topics and other things being pushed on your kids and, you know, what you're trying to teach them being challenged, I don't know that that's a bad thing, because it's forcing you to have those conversations with your kids.
Exactly.
If they were never hearing something different in school or at their job or whatever, then you would never have a conversation about it.
Well, and look, I mean, in this day and age, certainly in, 21st century America, you are not going to avoid varying topics, issues, and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
No, I certainly think there's an appropriateness of age of when you might be exposed to certain things. And there's certainly a difference between being exposed or hearing or learning about something and being immersed in something. So we need to kind of qualify, our language here a little bit. I can learn about a belief system, or I can spend 18 hours a day completely plunged into the middle of it where it shapes everything. And, we got to kind of navigate some of that in a very deliberate way. But no, coming across ideas, you're going to come across them, right? So have the age-appropriate conversation when it comes across, because there you are. Mm-hmm. None of this is to say that I think that every 6-year-old should be playing on their phone until midnight in their room and, indiscriminately watching what they want. Let's use some common sense. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I get the sense from parents of like teenagers, for example, that they think somehow they're going to be able to retract them back into some kind of safety bubble. And I'll tell you, my wife grew up in Amish country, and that doesn't even happen among the Amish. So at some level, how do we mitigate it? How do we ration what we spend our time in? And how do we learn to think intelligently and critically through things? Because avoidance will only take you so far in this world.
Yeah, and I thought of this from almost the devil's advocate side of, can the same thing be said about the church and the church's views? If you are outside of the church and think the church is a bad thing, the church is encouraging, bring your kids, let's baptize them. We're going to be in the word 2 hours every Sunday, and you have to believe. So it's like, you can look at it from both sides of going, everyone's doing this. Like, that's your role as a parent, as an adult, is to teach your kids what you value and what you think is true and going to be the most helpful thing for them. So if that's a Christian person and church is that thing, if it's not and something else is that thing, it's like, it's the same concept and principles. You just have to figure out, what's the outcome or what's the goal in that.
Yeah, and I think that's a cool perspective in this day and age, because I think a lot of Christians are naive to how scary it is for non-Christians to expose their children to Christianity, especially when their conception of Christianity is things like it's judgmental, it's hypocritical, it's superstitious, it's
violent, it's
violent.
Yeah.
It's add up all the stereotypes, right?
Yeah. So let me push back on some of this a little bit, because what I'm seeing right now. And I'm not going to say that this is all academia or all schools, but I will say that it has definitely gone up as far as the age, as far as what they're talking about, as far as your gender identity, for one.
Sure.
And how they're promoting this stuff and giving
think about sexuality,
and this is in a public school system, correct? Right. So, and I'm not saying it's every school. That's not my point. My point is that it's happening. And so therefore, is if you have, for instance, like Andrew, you were talking about church. Well, the reality of church is, no matter how involved you are in the church as a youth, for instance, there is so limited of a number compared to being in public school. Public school, you're there for 8 hours a day, right? And there's also different things now that are going on as far as like if a child chooses to go a different way as far as their gender and be identified as, well, I was a boy, now I'm a girl, they don't even have to let you know that as a parent. That's a problem. And so point being is that I think there's so many things now as parents and I know you said that it's cyclical, kind of goes around, every generation's going to have it. I agree with that
issue. Yeah.
But I think we're getting to my own opinion, I think there's certain things that are at hand right now that are definitely probably a little bit more, how do I say this? It's much more difficult for a parent to be involved in this stuff because it's so hidden. and it's hidden from them specifically. So I think that's where the hard part is. To have a conversation about ideas, we can do that all day. But to have a conversation to try and retract something that they now believe in because it's something that they've been indoctrinated with, that's much harder.
Yeah, and I hear you.
And I'm not saying that's the overwhelmingly population at this point. I'm just saying that it's becoming more and more and more common.
Yeah,
and that's troublesome to me.
I guess, and I'm with you fully on this, Steve. And I think it's just bringing to light the fact that we as parents kind of entrust our kids somewhat haphazardly to others on good faith, thinking that they're going to expose them in the right ways. I think of my dad back in the 50s and the 60s. Let's go to the 50s, which is apparently like the golden era, of the United States. And he went to conservative Catholic school. And the amount of crap that they put into his mind about God because a particular nun or Christian brother, or I'm not even going to say well-meaning teacher, who had an iota amount of knowledge and had an axe to grind in other ways. It destroyed my dad. So I guess it's just, to your point, big yes. I just don't think there's anything new today in terms of the foundational issue of it, is what I'm trying to say. That we are constantly, or our kids are constantly immersed in things that are not of Christ, even if they claim to be Christian. And sometimes very openly couldn't give a rip about Christian or even antithetical to Christianity.
Yeah, I know there's so many different instances or variations of Christianity or of religiosity or whatever you have, that even within that sect, it's hard to, take the fact from the fiction. Kind of like you were saying, like your dad in school, how would he have known that isn't the real message of Christianity or the real thing? Because, well, a priest told it to me or someone told it to me. You even have to play that game within the church and within what the church is teaching too.
I would even give my own story. I went through K through 8 Christian school, and by the time I got to high school, I was given the choice of whether I can go to a Christian or a Lutheran high school or the public high school, and it was no questions asked for me, public all the way. And the sole reason, not the sole, the primary reason why, I never wanted to have to take religion as a class again. Talk about the cosmic irony in that. And it wasn't because they were even probably teaching something in terms of content that was wrong, but it was because of the culture, the approach, the aura about some of the things that was just so distasteful to me. And I would say arguably probably from people who love the Lord too. But again, what I was immersed in had a toxifying factor of sorts. I don't know. It's a tough one for parents. Yeah. So maybe we just kind of bring it back to this. Look at your own example. Talk openly and honestly with your kids about the things that you're seeing in the world, the struggles that you have, the fears you have for them, and the things that you go counter to Christ. Be quick to listen and ask questions rather than just preach. The good news is that even though we're immersed in, be it church or be it school, like 8 hours a day, the reality is we tune 98% of it out. So, right? It's often what we catch more than what we learn or hear, so to speak.
Yeah.
And commit yourself to the way of Christ and show your kids what that looks like and talk about why you do it and what your struggles are. It's not a quick fix. And if there's toxins in your home from unmitigated social media or whatever kind of media that you're watching, keep it in check. You're not going to keep your kids from it completely, but you can limit the amount of poison that you drink.
Yeah. Kelly says, I think it's hard today as a parent to talk to your kids because your kids are getting their information everywhere else from their friends, online, at school, so they don't need to talk to their parents. Yeah, I would say that, to me, I would agree with part of that, which is their kids are getting information from so many different sources comparatively to what your dad was, for instance. I think it's information saturation, and You don't know what is good, and especially at that age, how do you filter that, right? And I don't think you're, especially like, for instance, if you take TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and or Facebook now, they have their stories or their reels or whatever, and you see a lot of the information that's on there, and it's some really troubling stuff. So if they're ashamed that they've been watching it, for one, they're not going to come to you for an explanation of how to decipher that information, because they don't think they should probably be, or they know they shouldn't be watching it anyway, but they are. And so therefore, who do they talk to? How are they filtering that information? Who's telling them what's right, what's wrong? Who's telling them, like, well, but this. And so it is hard.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And it's like, how do you create an environment where they do feel comfortable coming to you with those questions, and there's not a shame or a guilt associated with it. It's just like, hey, I have a question about this.
Right. And then, of course, you have your whole student body that is, doing the exact same thing. And so it's that peer pressure. You have everybody that is, on board with some of these things, because let's be honest, like, I don't actually consider the United States it used to be a predominantly Christian nation, right? I don't see that anymore. I see the Christians as the salmon swimming upstream, fighting, going against the grain. And not to say that hasn't always been the case. If you're actively living out your faith, you're always going to be going against, the sin, right?
But a lot of the worldview assumptions of Christianity are no longer the case today.
Correct.
Right.
So it is it'd be incredibly difficult to be a high school age or even younger at this point. So.
All right, let's do a station break here really quick. Kent, you got this one?
Sure.
All right,
You're
thanks,
listening to 216 The Net. This is Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. If you've got a question, you don't have to be in church. You can text it at any time to 815-314-0363. Questions you never thought you could ask in church every Wednesday at 12:30 Central, right here on 216 The Net. Or pop on to Facebook, YouTube, The Fellowship of Faith. Go out to FOF Plus. Because all the old shows and links and stuff are there every Sunday at 9:55 pregame for the worship hour comes on, and then we worship together. And again, you can worship in person. You can worship through Facebook, through 216thenet.com, through YouTube. However it is that you want to just love the Lord, do it through whatever social media channel, and then involve your kids. Just another real quick shout out today, first time ever. You're going to like this, Steve, is at 7 p.m. today, our first ever tabletop session. We're going to have Montana Suede in here, a local musician. It's a whole show designed for local musicians to come in, do a set or something, get to know them a little bit, and get their product out there. So tune in today, 7 right here, 216 The Net, for the first ever tabletop session.
All right.
Oh, that's cool.
Right.
Congrats. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to hit you up on that one.
Yeah, check it out. To go to Kelly's if I could, and I'm the perfect dad. So
yeah, right.
Really, you embody
very easy for me. I think as parents, we've gotten soft, just altogether. You can ask any of the 4 of my kids. I've got a teenager. She's in 8th grade. I've got a college age student, and 2 older ones, but I ain't afraid to ask the tough questions, sit them down. And so when I hear it's hard today as parents to talk to your kids, I think we're more scared of hurting their feelings or having them slam a door or whatever. And if you are a good Christian, you lead with your heart. Your kids, I think, yearn to have that conversation with their parents. Maybe I'm lucky and just have 4 good kids, but they look for that. And I think that when they don't get that, that's when they start to drift, if I could. Yeah. So we're old school. Every day we sit down together as a family at dinner. Every day.
That's impressive. That is a rare thing.
It is
in
rare.
This world.
And sometimes it's at 5, sometimes it's at 7.
Sure. I mean, it's going to vary. Yeah.
But, and that's where no phones, everybody just puts them down and we just
chat a little time together. Right.
Well, I'll be waiting for my invitation. Come on for dinner.
I'll give you the address. Stop by anytime.
Preferably 5 or 7.
We always have birdseed.
So we got another one here, kind of pertaining to kids or youth. I don't know. It's a stretch, but I'm making it work. How long should you date before marriage?
It doesn't say. It's going to be different for everyone. There's no biblical mandate on this. Biblically speaking, I mean, a lot of people got married that never even met each other before their wedding night. You know what?
Yeah.
And so, look, I mean, I think there's certainly a common sense factor to getting to know someone before marrying them. But it's what you do once you get married that's far more important than what you do leading up to it. So if you go into marriage going, I'm in this for life, we've got to make this work. All right? You date long enough to come to that place where you're able to make that decision. I think, period, right there.
Yeah. So, Simbus, saving your marriage before it starts. This is a program or something that we do with a bunch of couples that we have them take this analysis or assessment. It's 300 questions a piece. They don't do it together. They do it separately. Yeah. You bring in the information. It's about 18 pages long, and it's super in depth, and it's awesome. And then you sit down and you go through them with these 18 pages over a period of weeks, right? So what's nice about it, though, you're going back to how long should you date before you get married. The statistics is that if you date for over a year or longer, your marriage has a higher success rate, which makes sense. You know the person more. You're not jumping into anything that you shouldn't be,
right?
That you weren't aware of, or surprise. I've got this going on. So yeah. So I'm not advocating. In fact, my brother just he's divorced. Met this girl. We met her last time we were back in Nebraska. Great girl. I think she will fit into the family perfectly. But they were dating for 3 months, getting married.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I have my thoughts on that, but at the same time,
a little bit more maturity too.
Sure.
Yeah, the age at which you're getting married. I mean, kind of factors. Yeah. I think there's a lot of factors. Yeah.
But devil's advocate, how well do you know someone after 3 months?
Yeah. And how long have you known them before you were dating?
Yep.
I mean, there's so many things you could put that way.
Yep.
But yeah, in this day and age, when your marriage isn't arranged,
we should go back to that. We should go back to that.
You think so? Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. Where did arranged marriages come from? Like, is that a biblical context or a concept that?
No. I mean, arranged marriages are in so many different cultures. There's no biblical mandate or precedent, if you will, that shaped, I think, all of global history. From then on, you found it everywhere. But it goes back to your parent question. Especially, we're so used to the government being in control that we forget what it's like when you depended on family unit. Mm-hmm. Family unit was your government. Yeah. They were the ones that protected you. They were the ones that provided for you. They're the ones that kept order in society, in your own household, but by clan or tribe, or, however you want to put that as well. So, you can go with the logic of this. My kids start getting sexually curious, awake, or desiring in their teenage years. Well, are you going to trust a teenager to the most important decision, arguably, in their life? Who knows them better than mom or dad, right? And who can think through the implications and knows? I mean, you can go down this logical path and make a good, cogent argument for it. Mm-hmm. And, as much as we kind of balk at it today, there's a long history of happily arranged marriages. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's also a lot of train wrecks, that were there and a lot of serious issues, with it. So I don't want this to be misconstrued that I'm somehow advocating that is the proper way. It just happened to be the cultural way for the better part of human history.
Well, clearly right now we're at 50% divorce rate. Yeah, so who did it better?
Right.
Okay.
Everything's fine.
You had your opportunity to learn everything you could about that person.
So, I talk about this a lot, but my wife grew up in a Mennonite community. And without getting into the specifics, I mean, they weren't Amish, but a conservative evangelical Mennonite community where a lot of what you would call those old world practices were still very much a part, and to this day, a part of church life. Mm-hmm. And I remember when Tina and I started dating in the 90s, because she's always kind of like a black sheep. They loved her and welcomed her openly, but she was never part of the community. She never, quote, repented and baptized in to the community, but grew up in it. Mm-hmm. And, I remember in the 90s, we were dating, and the way that they would still get married is you would go to singings. And a singing was basically someone would just host an open house, and you would go and sing hymns together. The boys would sit on one side, the girls would sit on the other side. It was generally high school and college aged people. It really wasn't, 22, 23, you're phasing out of this hardcore at that point. And if you saw a girl sitting over there that kind of caught your eye, you went and you prayed about it. And then you talked to your parents about it. And then you and your parents went and talked to their parents about it. And then her parents talked to her about it. And then you talked to the church elder about it. And in 3 months you were married. And they boast a divorce rate under 2%. Doesn't mean they're all happily married.
Yeah, right.
But I like these as examples because, I think we are so immersed in a cultural way of looking at so many of these things that we take it as just assumed premises that it's the best way.
Yeah.
And somehow forget what makes it work. And I think what makes it work in their community is you have people from the same value structure with the same belief system, with an entire community rooting for you, surrounding you, and encouraging you. And believe me, there's a lot of crap. Tina's mom was divorced. She was one of those 2%ers, and it was horribly toxic, what they were in. And none of this is to advocate people like suffering needlessly in horribly toxic situations, or I'm trying to avoid some landmines that people are inevitably going to throw in the path I'm walking down here. I'm just trying to give some counter correctives to assumptions that we make.
Well, and I think there's a value, maybe a little bit higher commitment value. Like this is we're married. There is not really an option for divorce.
Yeah.
We're taking that off the table. I know when Barbie and I first got married, like the first couple of years were rough, and there were arguments there, and she at some point was just like, you know what, like maybe this just isn't going to work. Maybe the best option is divorce. And the one thing
that's to take the wind out of your, the breath out of your.
Well, totally. But I understood where she was coming from, but at the same time, in my mind, it was like, no, we can get through any of this.
Yeah.
And so what I want us to do is take that word out of our vocabulary because it's not an option. And of course, divorce is an option and it is biblical if there are certain things going on.
Right.
None of that stuff was going on. And so it's like, okay, you know what? Let's just remove that from it. So it's not an option.
Well, and it's like, did you have godly people around you who were there to help you through that?
No, not at the time.
Yeah.
No.
So I think that's one of those things about that community aspect of this is a commitment you're making, to your spouse, but to God and also to the people gathered there and the community gathered there.
Yep.
So are they taking that role seriously?
Yeah.
As far as we want to support you in this, we want to make sure you can make it work. Or before it happens, we want to make sure you're actually prepared for this and actually ready for this.
Right. Well, and I think too, like spiritually or whatever you want to call it, our relationship with God was not at a point where it's at right now. And so to me, I feel very fortunate that I had parents that I did that have been married for, almost 60 years now.
That's incredible. Yeah.
But they were a great role model. And part of that was it wasn't always good or easy for them. It was commitment. It was, we're going to work through this. And so like I had that model to say, no, we're not going to do this, even though it wasn't that at the time when I said, let's take divorce out of our vocabulary, that wasn't based on anything that, Jesus said or our faith or anything. That was just because my parents modeled it, so I feel very fortunate for that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And now she shares her flower cup with you.
Yes, she does. Look at this. See, she's not bitter. If we were end up getting divorced, I wouldn't have anything to drink out of.
No, that would be the one thing you want. This is what you want.
This is what I want. Yes.
The
fight for that.
Mediation breaks down right there.
Attorney.
We know that it's your cat.
I want that flower cup.
This one's interesting. I want your take on this, Dave. Was there ever any talk about the various synods of the Lutheran Church, Lutheranism, converging as one?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
It probably started as one at some point.
No, it never really started as one. I mean, and this is not only true in Lutheranism, this is true in Christianity as a whole. There are constantly talks within denominations and between denominations about finding some kind of unity or commonality not just in terms of belief, but also in terms of practice and organization. We got to kind of ask ourselves, what do we mean by one here, right? Because, let's take marriage as the analogy. We talk about two becoming one, but that doesn't mean that two people come together and end up believing the exact same thing, valuing everything in equal proportions and priority, and a number of other things, right? So what does oneness mean? And personally, I don't think the Christian church today does a good enough job of starting by defining their terms of oneness when they have ecumenical discussions. So the way that at least Lutheranism occurred here in the United States is at varying points in history, you have different bands of immigrants coming over from, Europe and settling here. And depending what year it was, or where the good crops were, or where land was cheaply available, or wherever community predecessors kind of settled, these different pockets would grow. And of course, they would start churches locally, independently. But they all knew that there was a value in having some, their strength in numbers. And by strength in numbers, I'm not talking like taking over the world or something like that. I'm talking just about the mutual help and support and encouragement that you can do it. I mean, to this day, why do churches band together? Well, very practically speaking, you get better rates on your health insurance if you go with a group plan, right? I mean, there's some very practical purposes, never mind the theological purposes behind it. So it always kind of grew not from a oneness idea, but independence coming together, at least in the Protestant, way of doing things, and then trying to find how those gatherings would kind of get along. But wherever you have 2 or 3 people gathered in Christ's name, you have 10 different opinions, right? And that's what's led to many of the fracturing or fissuring or distinctiveness, if I can put it that way, of what are called synods, at least as they exist today in Lutheranism. Different theological priorities, different hills to die on, different modes of practice that might not have been as negotiable, and sometimes just going, hey, we love you, we get along, but it just makes more sense to do it differently because of some different value structures that we have.
Yeah.
But all of it is really predicated on this idea that Jesus calls us to be one. He wants his body to be one, no matter what denomination flavor you have. So the real hard work is going, what does Jesus mean by that? And when the discussion starts there, I just think it's more fruitful.
And I think there's so much more that all various denominations and synods and everything have in common than they have different. But that seems to be, I guess, your differences kind of do define you. They define the lines between you. But that all generally seems to be the focus of, we're going to debate our differences rather than celebrate the things we have in common and go, okay, what can we do with what we have in common?
And that's the great irony of it, is because when you look at Christians of every stripe and variety, from Catholic to Orthodox to Protestant, what they agree upon in relation to what people who do not claim to be Christian, believe, it's like it's a 90 plus correlation point, percent correlation point. I mean, we agree on far more the foundations of what the faith is and what we disagree on. But people who don't know their faith well get hung up on practices oftentimes that have more to do with culture than they have to do with, biblical mandate.
Yeah.
We get hung up on our preferences more than on thus saith the Lord's, and turn our preferences into thus saith the Lord. And there are distinctives too in terms of belief that are important. That also make it, but yeah, to your point, you're right. That's what gets all the airtime, right?
Yeah, and that seems to be that's what gets the most like public airtime as well. Like the only time I see news stories about the
division.
church, it's because of this division between this specific synod, or this pastor got fired because of this thing, and like that's what the world, if you will, sees of a lot of religion, is like the disagreements, the arguments, the ways that, well, this place was wrong or this thing they did wrong, rather than seeing, here's all the great things that the church does for our society. You don't hear about that.
Indifferent is weird and weird is interesting. This is just
what
life.
sells papers, if you will.
Not only that, but it's even where our own interests are. I mean, like when you notice something that's very different than what's normative to you, you take special focus in it. I mean, think of how much attention something like the Amish community gets. I mean, how many Amish people really are there? But there's something so different about them that there's a point of fascination. Or take Judaism. Judaism is a powerhouse on the world scene, and yet in numbers is what, like less than 1% of the world population.
Yeah.
And yet they're so different that the distinctive becomes a point of fascination and interest, right? And
Yeah.
it's the same within intra kind of things, right? What do you talk about? Oh, you like that? Oh, you thought that movie was good?
Gross.
Oh, you kidding?
Mean
I mean,
Girls? That's ridiculous.
I know. We're still talking about it. Still can't convert this guy.
That's why, yeah. We'll never start our own denomination, Dave.
Are you shielding your family appropriately from Mean
Yes.
Girls? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Do you keep
Yep.
that out of the house?
Yep.
So as
We
not
don't
to
even
lead-
speak those words.
No.
in our home.
Right. Yeah.
You're taking the right steps.
Yeah. We will not speak like the Gadinis. The Gadini tribe.
Well, with that, Kent has given me the finger over here.
Oh, yeah.
And not that.
So
finger,
was
the
I.
other finger, like saying wrap it up here. So, guys, thanks for listening today. I mean, great questions as always. Good talking, Steve, Andrew,
Yep.
Kent. Just good being in studio today. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, it is important to us. And you can text your questions in at any time to 815-314-0363. Let me give it one more time. 815-314-0363. If you texted it in, it's in here in the inbox. We will get to it. If the question comes up, please text it in, and we will get to it as quickly, truly, as we possibly can. We go live every Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 p.m. Central Time here on 216 The Net, and you can catch us on any of your favorite podcast providers. Just search questions you never thought you could ask in church. Catch our past episodes, and maybe we've hit some of the things that you've been thinking about already. That being said, we're out of time. We're out of here. God bless, and we'll catch you next week.
Questions you never thought you could have. Questions you never thought you could have.